Welcome to our latest edition from here in Jerusalem of Deep Dive featuring Hudson Institute. And today we will discuss, as usual, the latest developments, the current state of play here in Israel, the Middle East, the Islamic Republic of Iran, the United States, Europe, and all the derivatives thereof. To do just that, let's now turn to Washington, D.C., where we're joined by Marshall Billingsley, a senior fellow at Hudson Institute, formerly Deputy Secretary General of NATO, as well as an Undersecretary of the Treasury for countering terror financing. It's great to see you, Marshall. What can you specify as the most urgent matter to discuss today?
Well, Jonathan, again, it's great to be with you and with my fellow senior colleague from Hudson, Joel Rayburn, and my colleagues in Israel. I would say the tendency is to focus on the here and now, the immediate, the situation with Hamas, the Gallants wanting to yet again negotiate with Hezbollah ad nauseum, the Houthi ballistic missile strike, of course, not a terrorist organization according to the Biden-Harris administration. But what I would urge is a focus on Iran's nuclear program. We now know not only that the Director of National Intelligence has been unable to assure the Congress that Iran is no longer proceeding with a testable nuclear device, but we know that Iran has activated two of its Ahmad program nuclear facilities, two facilities that were involved in the Ahmad program, which is the program that was designed to help Iran proceed to a nuclear weapon. Israel, of course, in a very daring raid by the Mossad, captured much of the archives of the Ahmad program, and Prime Minister Netanyahu put those on display. But we now know that Iran has activated work at two of those sites. That is greatly concerning. It should be greatly concerning to all of us.
Thank you, Marshall. Let's now turn to Central Israel, where we're joined by Brigadier General in Reserve Yossi Kupelwasser, formerly the Director General of the Israeli Ministry for Strategic Affairs, as well as the head of the IDF Intelligence Directorate's Research and Assessment Unit. It's good to see you, General. I'd like to ask you, with regard, if you may follow up on what Marshall just mentioned. The Iranians are not stopping at nothing. They're pushing through in order to reach that capacity of breakout. The moment they take that decision, they may expedite that process into a point of no return for the West and the international community at large. How would you characterize the current state of play?
Well, first of all, it's always a pleasure to be with you. And I agree with Marshall that the issue of what's going on in the Iranian nuclear program is a key determinator for what's going to happen in the Middle East right now. Because if the Iranians really move towards breakout, towards having a nuclear weapon, using the limited time left before there is a decision about who's the next president of the United States, the entire picture is going to change and become much more difficult to contend with. Since as long as we are playing against the tentacles of the Iranian octopus, it's easier. But if we have to work against Iran itself, I hope that we shall be able to have the Americans on our side that addressing such a huge challenge. It seems as if the Iranians, on the one hand, keep trying to convince IAEA that they are ready to continue negotiating without doing anything that would satisfy the IAEA, without allowing resumed monitoring, without getting back to where they were in the beginning. This is out of the question from their point of view. And it's a very dangerous situation because right now the Iranians have enough highly enriched uranium for producing something like a small arsenal of nuclear weapons within a very short period of time if they manage to cross the technological hurdles. And what is very concerning in this respect is that because the Iranians are supplying the Russians now with the long-range missiles that are so necessary for Moscow in its war against Ukraine, the chances that the Russians are going to be ready to do all kinds of things that they were reluctant to do until now on the nuclear realm become higher. And I think this was reflected in concerns raised by American and European officials during this last week. That because the issue of how you use the technology you write in order to move from having fissile material into having a nuclear bomb, that's the main obstacle that the Iranians still face. And even though they did all kinds of experiments in the past, they probably need this technology to be proven and to be reliable for them if they are going to break out rapidly towards having a bomb. And you can't be as sure that the Russians were not going to do that as we were beforehand. And that's a new situation that has to keep us awake at night.
Thank you, General. Let's now turn to Washington, D.C. once more, where we're joined by retired Colonel Joel Rayburn, lately, of course, a senior fellow at Hudson Institute, and it's congratulations, of course, for joining the Institute. Beyond that, also the founding director of the American Center for Levant Studies, and a long list of other positions, including senior director at the NSC for Iran, among others, and the U.S. Special Envoy for Syria. It's great to see you, Joel. I'd like to quote IAEA Director General Mariano Grossi Rafael, who said the following: "I salute the possibility and look forward to engaging with the new president of Iran and with the government of Iran and continuing in our indispensable efforts to give the credible assurances to the international community that nuclear program is in peaceful ways and it will continue. So there are challenges ahead, but they are insurmountable, according to him." Are they insurmountable?
No, well, there are two parts. And first of all, let me say it's a pleasure to be on the show for the first time in my new capacity as fellow of the Hudson Institute. I look forward to working with you and other Hudson colleagues. There are two elements to the problem of the Iranian regime, and it's both one. It's one of technical capacity, but also the will on both sides. But let me say this: the nuclear issue for the Iranian regime. So far, I think there's been a focus in the international community, the international organizations, the Western countries, to try to emphasize trying to deny the Iranian regime the technical capacity or the intellectual capital to be able to create a nuclear weapon and then a nuclear weapon an arsenal. And I think there's been far too little, which is necessary. I'm not saying it's not necessary. That needs to be done. And although it has not been successful so far. It's been insufficient, this effort to deny them the technical means and the technical capacity. But the decision of whether to develop a nuclear weapon and then deploy a nuclear weapon or deploy an arsenal that's a decision that rests in the minds of the Iranian regime leaders. And I think there's been far too little done to discourage, deter, disincentivize, scare Iranian leaders from taking these steps toward a nuclear weapons capability. So there needs to be a restoration of deterrence, not just through physical means, not just through military pressure and so on, but also by making it clear that there will be consequences imposed for steps that the Iranian regime would take. So far, there haven't been many consequences. And it's a strange thing, because the Iranian regime, after the Iran-Iraq War, Iranian leaders took the decision to have a strategic doctrine which is almost entirely offensive. They essentially abandoned the means, developed the means to defend their own territory, to defend their own infrastructure. And instead, they've constructed this proxy terrorist empire, and they've assumed all along that they would always be able to just work through proxies, occasionally directly, but mainly through proxies, and never have to defend themselves. It's a very strange thing. They're actually defenseless against any significant adversary power. They don't have an air force to speak of. They don't have an air defense, really. They don't have a real army, and they don't have a real navy. They're the only middle power in the world that I know of that is almost entirely defenseless against a conventional, against a peer conventional adversary. And they paid no pride. They gambled. They bet that no one would make them have to defend themselves. And so far, that gamble has paid off. So they've been able to take steps such as provoking the October 7th crisis, conflict, taking these steps now on the threshold, almost on the threshold of a nuclear weapons capability, without ever having to defend themselves. And I think that has to change. Things that they value have to be put at risk, so that they decide, so they don't take the decision to go for a nuclear weapons capability.
Indeed. One of those gambles has to do, of course, with the fact that they do have, as was classified by various CENTCOM commanders, the largest ballistic missile arsenal in the Middle East, of course, and one of the largest in the world at that. But nonetheless, let's turn to central Israel, where we're joined by the former chief of intelligence of Mossad, as well as a senior IDF intelligence directorate officer, Brigadier General in Reserve Amnon Sofrin. It's good to see you, Amnon. I'd like to immediately ask you about this specific attack that occurred yesterday, namely Sunday at 6:21 in the morning by the Iranian proxy Ansar Allah, which is dominated by the Houthi tribe in Yemen, which launched a new type of ballistic missile towards Israel. It was somewhat intercepted. An interceptor did strike it. Nevertheless, its debris continued in high velocity into Israeli territory and scattered in central Israel in a number of locations. But nonetheless, when I look at this, I identify it as basically Iranian R&D, where they continue to gamble, as Joel noted, that nobody will target them directly for those kind of activities by their proxies throughout the region, so long as it is directed towards the U.S. ally, Israel, as well as other locations within the Middle East. And just to go about the nuclear deal that was struck in 2015, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, it was never signed. Nevertheless, it was backed by UN Security Council Resolution 2231, in which it notes the following in Annex B, Paragraph 3, Iran is called upon not to undertake any activity related to ballistic missiles designed to be capable of delivering nuclear weapons, including launches using such ballistic missile technology, until the date 8 years after the JCPOA adoption day, or until the date in which the IAEA admits a report confirming the broader conclusion, whatever is earlier. None is earlier for that matter, and yet it continued its belligerent activities and developing a vast arsenal, and nobody stopped it.
Correct, Jonathan. First of all, let's speak about facts. The missile that was launched from Yemen is what we call a Khaybar Shikan. It's what we call the old version of 1,500 kilometers that was upgraded to 2,000 kilometers, probably by the Iranians. And it was launched and it was aimed probably, as I believe, to hit the Ben Gurion Airport, or the area of Ben Gurion Airport, because it's not a very accurate missile. The fact that they launched the missile is not surprising, because they tried in the past to launch many missiles into Israel that were intercepted on the way. Let us recall that some of the missiles were intercepted on the way to Eilat. Others were intercepted on the way to the central part of Israel. And nevertheless, one more time, we must remember that they launched or succeeded in launching a UAV, a kamikaze UAV, over 2,500 kilometers into Tel Aviv, launched from Yemen. So they have the capabilities, and they upgrade the capabilities, of course, with Iranian assistance. Now that's part A. This is not the full reaction, as they declare, on what happened in Hodeidah, our attack on the port of Hodeidah. This is not the right answer. This is not the full answer. It is only a hint, and we can do more for that. Now, let's take into consideration that they are now getting very close to the backed Iranian militias in Iraq. They opened what we call a kind of an office, a liaison office in Baghdad. They engage with the backed Iranian militias in Iraq, and there are rumors that they transfer people there for trainings and for assisting or being able to operate against Israel, or to act against Israel from Iraq. And lately we heard that some of them came into the southern part of Syria, about 50 men out of them, experts on launching missiles and launching UAVs from the southern part of Syria. And this is not the first time they're there. That means they try to get very close to Israel in order to engage Israel directly, and not only by launching missiles and rockets and UAVs and so on. Now, regarding the Iranians, the fact that Iran signed the peace treaty, the JCPOA on 2015, doesn't mean that Iran is going to obey what is written there. And if you look at the whole activities they carried out since 2015, many things that were written in this agreement are not fulfilled by Iran or not implemented by Iran. The fact that Iran, nevertheless, the warnings that came from the Western countries, delivered the weapon systems, missiles and UAVs, of course, to Russia, means that they don't care about what you're going to say or what you're going to do. Because I have the backup of Russia, of China, of North Korea, and other countries as well, and you can't really cause me any damage. And therefore, I allow myself, or I prevail myself, to be what we call Billy Grant, and to keep on moving and doing whatever I like.
Indeed. Let's turn to Marshall once again. Marshall, we hear everything and we realize the Iranians are a belligerent actor, a malign actor. It's, as General Soflin just mentioned, delivering weapons of different types of munitions to Russia for its war of aggression against Ukraine. Its activities throughout the region are, of course, widespread, and also the latest activities in the Horn of Africa, as well as in Africa proper. We're seeing them supporting Al-Shabaab and having a widespread collaboration with them, of course, with keen interests on the coal that they are attracting out of there, and of course also the attacks against freedom of navigation, not only in the Red Sea, but also Bab el-Mandeb and the adjacent waterways. What should the West at large and the United States in particular do in order to ensure that this virus does not spread further?
We are faced with a very similar situation as we had in 2017 when we came to office after the disastrous 8 years of the Obama-Biden administration, and all of the decisions that led to the removal of sanctions on the Iranian regime, which caused them to become flush with cash. And that cash then immediately was transferred, not for the benefit of the Iranian people, but out of that country to Iran's terror proxies. We're back in the same situation yet again with the Biden-Harris administration, but the same people who have again very fecklessly refused to enforce President Trump's sanctions on the regime. And the result, as I said to you about 2 weeks ago, was the gross domestic product in Iran has nearly doubled since Biden took office. The amount of oil that they're exporting to China has skyrocketed sixfold since Biden took office. But I will keep today pointing you back to what Iran is doing in its fissile material program. When we left office in 2020, there were no stockpiles, no known stockpiles of highly enriched uranium to speak of. Now Iran has more than 800 kilograms of highly enriched uranium. They are spinning more than 9,400 centrifuges. They had just a couple hundred when we were in office. Those centrifuges are producing massive additional quantities of uranium. And as I've mentioned, the work that Iran appears to be doing at Sanjarian, which is 20 kilometers east of Tehran, and Golub Dare, which during the Ahmad program, the development of the actual nuclear weapon program, Golub Dare was the key facility. They were doing roughly 40-odd tests out of 180-odd experiments, all with the goal of creating the explosive necessary to drive that nuclear weapon. So this is a serious problem. Iran has refused to answer questions that the IAEA has about what they were doing at various sites, why there were uranium particles in various places. Iran is a serial liar. We all know this. They lie about the Chemical Weapons Convention that they're a party to. They have chemical weapons. They lie about the Biological Weapons Convention that they're a party to. They have biological weapons. They lie about the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty that they're a party to. They are in the process of developing a testable nuclear device, and this is now becoming a crisis.
General Kupavasa, we don't have very much time and we still want to hear everyone, but nonetheless, Israel is now deliberating whether or not to wait for the future, for better timing, to build its capacity to launch a very efficient war on multiple fronts in the event that we engage the Iranian proxy in Lebanon, Hezbollah, or to launch right now where the starting point is quite good in comparison to where we were roughly 11 months ago. And the various challenges right now that may arise out of that might be tough, but nonetheless, Israel would prevail ultimately, and that is something that needs to be within that calculus. If we're talking about those two schools of thought, Iran does not want to go to war, or for Hezbollah to go to war absent a nuclear umbrella. Is that not part of the calculus that we should have here in Israel when we're talking about whether or not to launch a war against Hezbollah now?
It is, should be, and yes, it is a part of the calculus, and that's clearly one of the things that is taken into account, and pushing into taking the initiative against Hezbollah sooner than later. But there are so many other considerations. The question of what's going to happen in the United States is another issue that has to be taken into account in the elections for president in the United States, and the question of what's going to happen in Gaza, and there are so many other elements that have to be taken into account. I think personally that what we need to do first, and this is what this is the reason why everybody in the Iranian axis is so eager to make sure that we do not finish the job in Gaza. What we need to do is to finish the job in Gaza. We have to remove Hamas from power in Gaza first and foremost, and then move to the north. It's the issue is that there's a reluctancy in Israel to do that because we are afraid that this would mean that we will have to rule Gaza, at least temporarily, and we prefer having Hamas in power than either us or chaos in the Gaza Strip. And that leaves Hamas in power and makes a situation that is becoming impossible to reach a deal for the release of the hostages. And it's becoming more difficult to tell a clear message, to convey a clear message to Hezbollah that they would rather move north and evacuate the area next to the border, so that we shall be able to guarantee a safe return of the population of the border area to their communities. This is the case right now. So in my mind, first and foremost, we have to finish the job in Gaza. But it's any opinion here is a good opinion because it's so complicated that you cannot rule out a different opinion.
And I thought that my opinion was the only one that counts. But nonetheless, Colonel Rayburn, I'd like to hear your opinion on this as well, since naturally, as formerly also a senior director at the NSC for Lebanon, what are the complexities when we're talking about such a war right now? Is this going to draw additional theaters into the mix?
Yes, because essentially this is an Iranian this is an Iranian strategic alliance, Iranian coalition. I mean, for my part, I think of Hezbollah as an organic part of the IRGC. I think of the Houthis as essentially just slightly looser version of that, with tightening Iranian strategic direction over time. I mean, there's an Iranian brigadier general sitting in Sana'a, probably directing all of this. Abdulreza Shalahi, the one who tried to blow up Saudi Ambassador Adel Jubeir at Cafe Milano a few years ago. But I think in the bigger picture, I want to look, the Houthis under Iranian direction just fired a ballistic missile that they probably intended to use to hit Ben Gurion Airport, as Ahmed mentioned. They didn't intend to miss. They intended to hit Ben Gurion Airport. What if they had actually hit Ben Gurion Airport? There would be a major war going on right now. That tells you that the Iranian regime is willing to provoke a major war. And the day after they did that, the day after they attempted to provoke a major war with Israel, they exported 1.5 to 2 million barrels of oil. They sold 1.5 to 2 million barrels of oil without impediment. And just as they do every day, they sell 1.5 million to 2 million barrels of oil, mainly to China, with no trouble. These things don't go to. Is it any wonder then why they are not deterred? Is it any wonder why they don't hesitate? They're able to do this kind of provocative, aggressive thing against not just Israel, but across the board, against Ukraine, against the United States, against anyone, and they sell oil without any let up. Why is that? There has to be a strategy to restore deterrence, and it's got to be synchronized with a coherent energy strategy, which the Western countries have not had in a long time because they were more interested in climate change than they are in actual safety of their countries and their allies. That's got to change. You have to be able to take these 2 million barrels of Iranian oil off the table each day from the global market. And to do that, you have to be willing to ramp up production of friendly oil and friendly energy sources. So the next U.S. administration is going to have to face this directly and have a coherent energy policy that will enable a coherent national security strategy to stop this aggressive regime before it launches what could be a World War III, as President Trump has been mentioning lately. It is. I agree with Marshall. This is reaching crisis proportions, not just on the nuclear file, but on just the straight out conventional war front.
General Sofrin, since we're out of time, 2 sentences. What should Israel do when we're talking about convincing the United States currently that Israel is with its back against the wall, as it is when we're talking about all of Iran's proxies operating with such velocity?
I think that the administration understands exactly what is the situation Israel is in. But they have their own calculations, and they have what we call engaged with the elections for presidency, and this is the main effort. And therefore, Israel is not on the first and not on the second place. I hope it will be on the third, but not for the time being. And we have to wait until the elections are over and the new administration comes in and so on.
General Sofrin, Colonel Rayburn, General Kuperwasser, and Mr. Billingsley, thank you so very much for all of your insights. I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next edition from here in Jerusalem, wishing you a good day.
Goodbye.